So last time we talked about the definition of IBD, or inflammatory bowel disease. Today I want to talk about the 4 triggers. And this is super important to understand no matter what form of autoimmune disease you may have. So whether you have Hashimoto's, you have vitiligo like me, you have some other autoimmune disease, super important to understand these 4 triggers because they're the same for all autoimmune diseases. The first is really genetic. Now what do we mean by genetic trigger? We mean that you have the genes, you have inherited the genes to create this disease, right? And in this sense, every disease, every condition, everything to do with you as a person is related to your genetics. So is it important? Maybe, but we don't understand genetics enough to really do much about it. And if you have these conditions, if you have an autoimmune disease, obviously you have the genetic predisposition, right? The last thing I'd say about genetics is it's important to understand that, you know, the number of cases of these diseases is growing much higher than genes alone would explain. So yes, of course, if you have this, you have a genetic precondition, you have a genetic predisposition towards developing that disease, but that doesn't explain everything, right? Genes, number 1. Number 2 is really the autoimmune trigger. Now here, we're mostly talking about food, but we could be talking about other things too. Other things, what I mean, mold, sometimes stress. Stress is always important. We'll get into stress in a little bit more. But there's something that has actually triggered an autoimmune response. Maybe smoking, maybe breathing something you shouldn't be breathing, like all kinds of things that could be triggering that response, right? So for me, the important one to remember here is that there are certain foods, certain food molecules, that when you break it down, they look a lot like the human body, and therefore, or elements of the human body. And this is a process called molecular mimicry, where the immune system thinks that it's attacking a gluten cell from wheat, for example, because the gluten cell doesn't belong in the body. But in fact, it's not attacking the wheat, it's attacking the human body itself. So some kind of autoimmune condition. Now the important thing to say here is you can stop eating the wheat, you can stop eating that trigger, and of course your symptoms will improve, but they won't go away completely because now you've already elicited an autoimmune response. You've already caused the confusion between whatever it may be, your gut cells and the wheat cells or whatever is triggering you. And so therefore, even if you stop eating the wheat, you're still going to be triggered a little bit, right? So what my clients focus on mostly is the last 2 pathways. What are the last 2 pathways? One is really about the fight or flight versus the rest and digest, right? So this is the neurological pathway. So we want, another way to think about this is stress and chronic stress, right? So most of the time we want to be in this sort of rest and digest parasympathetic state. So sorry, there's a difference between the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic is that rest and digest. The sympathetic is fight, flight, or freeze, right? So if we're here in the jungle in South Africa, not exactly a jungle, we're here in a little park in South Africa. If there were a lion next to me, I wouldn't want to be engaging in my parasympathetic tone, right? I would want to be engaging my sympathetic tone. I would want to be either fighting with a lion, which is probably a better idea, because if you run away from the lion, you're going to be breakfast, that's for sure, right? So, or you can just freeze, probably the best idea if I'm a human, because it doesn't see humans as food most of the time, right? So anyway, I should be engaging the sympathetic system if there's a lion next to me, but there's no lion next to me. So I need to be chill, I need to be in rest and digest. Now what happens is we don't have lions next to us, most of us, but we do have traffic, we do have a spouse who we're arguing with all the time, we do have kids who kind of irritate us, we do have a boss who doesn't do what we want them to do, and those little bits of irritation build up. And we are constantly in a state of stress, and that's making the autoimmune situation much, much worse. It's giving us more flare-ups and more problems, right? And then the last pathway, the autoimmune pathway we can think of, is really the inflammation pathway. So what I mean here is that most of us are putting our bodies in a state of inflammation. This is separate from the stress. And for me, one source of inflammation is basically that we're too glycolytic. We're using sugar too much of the time when our bodies are made to use fat as a source, right? That's one source, but there's one problem, but there's other problems. But a lot of them are related to diet. So when you're eating a lot of sugar, when you're eating a lot of carbs, when you're eating foods that are your trigger foods from the previous pathways that we discussed, you're creating this low-grade inflammation. And inflammation, of course, is really important. I don't know if you can see on my hand, I got a pretty bad cut, about a month ago, a pretty deep wound. And if there wasn't inflammation, this would never have healed. So inflammation is super, super important. But the problem is, now it's done, now there's nothing there except a bit of scar tissue, then the inflammation has to go away. So if we're always in this low state of inflammation because we're eating foods that are wounding us, or whatever it may be, because we're under some stress or whatever, that is making the autoimmune conditions much, much worse, right? In the next video, we're going to go into what exactly works for me and my clients when we're looking to reverse our autoimmune symptoms, when we're looking to improve our gut health, when we're looking to get over our Crohn's, IBD, and ulcerative colitis.